Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Now, what is it? First of all, can you summarize what you said? The gist of your 12,000 words.
Yes, I tried to lay out a way of looking at this issue that was a purely scientific way that stepped clear of all the politics. And I said, what seems to me very obvious, that there were two hypotheses on the table. Both were very plausible and reasonable. One was that the virus had jumped from an animal to human, as many epidemics have before it. And the other was that the virus had escaped from a lab. And right there in the middle of Wuhan is the leading lab that does research on coronavirus in China. So obviously, since we know that viruses do escape from labs quite frequently, there's certainly a possibility that a virus had escaped from this lab. So you have two plausible hypotheses on the table. There's no direct evidence for either one. It's important to keep that in mind. So we have no final proof or conclusion. But if you take these two hypotheses and you take the available evidence and say, well, which of these two hypotheses explains the evidence better? So that's what most of my article is concerned about, just weighing up the evidence and seeing which hypothesis does better. And in every case, I find that lab leak provides a better, more plausible explanation than does natural emergence. Absolutely, there's no evidence for biological warfare. And we know that virologists all around the world have been doing this kind of experiment. Their rationale is that if they take a dangerous animal virus that might spread to humans, and if they can study it in the lab and alter it in ways that would make it more infectious for humans safely inside their lab, then they can get a jump ahead of nature and be able to predict and prevent the next epidemic. That's the rationale. Many people may not agree with it, especially in the light of recent events. But the Chinese biologists in this regard, so far as we know, we're not doing anything very different from what virologists around the world have been doing. It's just they were working with a particularly dangerous virus, the coronavirus.
And also particularly in a system which is quite close. It's not like Germany or US or India or Britain. It's China, which is quite closed.
Yes, the Chinese system is closed. Of course, its scientists seek out and have collaborations with scientists in other countries, but everything is basically under the control of the Communist Party. Gain of function simply means when you take a natural virus and you alter its genome to give it qualities it did not have before, and which make it more infective, more able to become a pathogen. So gain of function is a very deceptive phrase because it sounds so mild, but actually it involves creating a dangerous virus that did not exist in the world before. So there's been considerable debate about this issue more or less for the last 20 years, ever since virologists gained the genetic tools to alter viruses. And of course, it's a very sort of tempting technology for them. It gives them a sense of power to create something that didn't exist before in nature. It helps their careers. So there are all kinds of reasons why virologists were interested in monkeying around with these viruses, but there is the possibility there of creating something extremely dangerous.
I think scientists of all kinds and strategists love to create these cynical euphemisms. So to me, one of the comparable things here is collateral damage, isn't it? Or what was it? Enhanced interrogation methods.
It certainly is a euphemism. You're quite right. It's a very sort of bland, mild phrase that makes you think, well, there's nothing much going on, but there is a lot going on. And there's been a sort of fierce debate in the United States and elsewhere in the last 10, 15 years as to what experiments should be allowed by gain of function and what experiments should be prohibited. And there was a moratorium for a short time from 2014 to 2017 on doing this kind of research, but it was subsequently lifted. And if you look back at the language of the moratorium, it's very, very loose and allows you to do lots of research that others might think was gain of function, but the language of the moratorium says is not gain of function and is expressly allowed. So I think this is what Dr. Fauci was referring to. He was referring to the fact that the moratorium does not apply to wide categories of research in which viruses are manipulated, and therefore he had supported none at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. However, it's clear that the Wuhan Institute of Virology, particularly Dr. Zhengli Shi, was doing. They published an experiment in 2017, which seems to me to go way beyond the terms of the moratorium, however loose its language is. And I think we're going to see in the next few weeks Dr. Farcis being asked, well, even if he didn't think he was supporting any gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute, is this research published by Dr. Xing a violation of the terms of the NIH grant to Wuhan? And I think at that point we may see Dr. Fauci say, well, Dr. Xi was doing illegitimate research. She was doing research which I did not authorize, but was forbidden by the terms of the grant we gave her. Now, I don't know that's the case, but I think it's possible. This is how the situation will turn out.
You mentioned this particular research that was published in 2017 by Shi Zhengli. What exactly was this?
Well, she was investigating the properties of some bat coronaviruses which she had found and which she had reason to believe might be very infective and cause the next jump to humans. Remember, the background of all this is that we have already had two serious epidemics from these bat coronaviruses, the SARS-1 in 2002 and the MERS in 2012. So all these coronaviruses were a matter of legitimate research of interest both to Dr. Shi and to Dr. Fauci. So Dr. Shi was taking some of these new coronaviruses, and she was studying their spike proteins. So the spike proteins are the things that jut out all around the surface of the virus, and they are the things that latch onto the target cells. And the precise nature of the spike proteins is very important because that determines what kind of host the virus is going to attack, whether it's going to be a bat or a human or a cat or whatever. So she was cutting out the genes for these spike proteins, and she was swapping them into the genome of another virus. So she could study the property of the spike protein in a sort of standard background. So she had these, I think it was 8 coronaviruses, and she was putting their spike proteins into the backbone of another virus in order to see if she could create a more powerful and effective virus.
What kind of pushback have you got since you wrote this?
Well, to my surprise, I haven't gotten any pushback at all. I thought it would be a controversial article and lots of people would attack it. But no one has. I think it's because I did my best effort to lay out the evidence as carefully and as unambiguously as I could. And so far, everyone has accepted the outline of the argument I presented. And I haven't seen so far any pushback. Science works on facts. Politics works on consensus. So if you've got the facts, you only need one person to say, well, here are the facts. If you don't have the facts, then you need to gather up a lot of scientists to sort of make it seem the weight of scientific authority is on your side. So this is how the critics attacked my last book, which was about the biological nature of race. I think it was a very good book, even though I'm the author of it. There is not a single scientific error in it. That is, anyone has pointed out, there's not a single racist statement in it. These scientists were attacking it for political reasons, in that there's American universities, I hope this is not true of Indian universities, American universities have been overtaken by an extreme sort of delusional political left creed in which obvious facts are denied. So they deny that there's any biological basis to race. They deny that there's any difference between the sexes. They say everything is socially constructed. And anyone who disagrees with them, they will attack and harass and intimidate and try to have them thrown out of academic life. So, of course, if I'd been an academic, my career would have been ended by this attack. Well, I think the stage was set by the visit of the World Health Organization inquiry team to Beijing in February of this year. So at first, this seemed to be a propaganda victory for the Chinese. After all, they'd more or less handpicked the members of the committee as a condition of letting the WHO into Beijing. The WHO had to agree to all kinds of conditions of what they would not see, would not ask to see. And of course, they came out with the pre-scripted conclusion, lab escape is extremely unlikely. We won't waste any time on that. And we think it was natural emergence. So at first, this seemed like the Chinese had prevailed again in their version of events. What also became clear at that point was that the Chinese authorities had absolutely no evidence to offer the group in favor of natural emergence. So all these previous epidemics have left copious traces in the environment of their passage. You find the bat population the virus came from. You can find the intermediate animals. These were things called civets in the case of SARS-1 that are eaten in Chinese wet markets. You can see the virus mutating a few times as it gains the capacity to infect civets, which are rather different from bats. So the virus has to make these mutational shifts. It shifts a few times more when it moves to humans and becomes a sort of mild pathogen. And then after a total of about, I think it's 25 mutations, you can see SARS-1 becoming a really fierce human pathogen. So with SARS-2, at first everyone expected to see similar signs in the natural environment, the bat population, the intermediate hosts, the infected human populations. But there's none of that. There's not a shred of evidence of natural emergence.
In fact, that is the furin cleavage that we talk about between protein S1 and S2. And as I try to describe it to my readers and viewers, is that it's a bit like a guided missile. There is a sensor ahead that directs a missile to the target, whether it's seeking heat from an engine or a radar waves or whatever. And then as it gets the missile to the target, it sort of drops off and then the warlord takes over. Then the explosive takes over. And as you explained, furin is like an enzyme that our cell gifts this virus to cut it as the S1, S2 cleavage. And that is to you funny.
Yes, it's very curious because the little section of protein at the furin cleavage site is sort of long enough that it's the kind of thing that viruses often obtain from one another by swapping genetic material. And they often do this when two viruses happen to infect the same cell. And when their genomes are assembled inside the cell, they get reassembled with bits of the other virus. So viruses can acquire new things like a furin cleavage site by borrowing them from another virus in the same family. So what's significant here is that there's no other virus in the SARS-CoV-2's family. They're called sarbecoviruses. There's no other sarbecovirus that has the furin cleavage site. So that means SARS-CoV-2 could not have acquired this extra section in the usual way by borrowing it from one of its family members. So you then have to ask, well, how on earth did it get there?
Karan Johar of Shloka Events, it's my question also. How has WHO come out in this as yet? I mean, has it come out with its prestige intact, or some of it intact, or respect?
Well, I'm afraid it's come out with its reputation severely damaged. It's made clear that it's in the pocket of the Chinese. And China's always had considerable control over the WHO. For example, it's managed to exclude Taiwan, which has just as much right to the World Health Organization's benefits as anyone else. So, and I think China overplayed its hand in this case because it showed how completely the WHO was in its pocket. It sort of handpicked the members of the committee. It sort of led the committee around by the nose, saying you can't go here, you can't go there. So I think the WHO has suffered a bad blow to its reputation. It needs now, it should never have accepted the invitation, I think, on the Chinese terms. It needs now to reestablish its independence by showing the world that it's a true scientific body. It's independent of any government, including especially that of China, and it needs to turn over a new leaf.
If you've seen that congressional hearing, you recall Senator Kennedy's expression, if you hold Xi Jinping upside down and shook him, WHO will fall out of his pocket. So as you mentioned this, I was remembering that. Would you believe Dr. Fauci if he says tomorrow he had no idea this was going on?
Well, I think he's an honorable public servant, and my instinct is always to believe what he says, but then I have to try and reconcile what he says with the available facts. So if he says he didn't know what was going on, yes, that would be perfectly possible because he's not directly overseeing this grant. He's overseeing hundreds or thousands of grants. This particular lump of money, it didn't go directly from Dr. Fauci to Dr. Xi. It went to a man called Dr. Daszak in New York, who runs something called the Eco Health Alliance. And he, in turn, then funded Dr. Xi. So Dr. Farcis is sort of some way removed from this particular experiment. And I would think that it's probably up to Dr. Daszak, first of all, as the principal investigator, they call it, the person who's responsible for these funds. It's up to Dr. Daszak to see that these funds are being used correctly. So yeah, if Dr. Farcis said he didn't know about it, I would tend to believe him, and then to ask why Dr. Daszak didn't know about it. He wrote this letter was very important. It was one of two letters published by virologists that sort of shaped public opinion for the next year, and they should never have been allowed to get away with these letters without the press examining them and probing into exactly what they meant and finding out all the sort of deep flaws in these letters. So Dr. Daszak was the author of the first. It later turned out he drafted the whole letter and got several people who were his friends to sort of sign on. And they published this letter saying, let's stand shoulder to shoulder with our fellow Chinese scientists on the forefront of lots of stuff like that. And also saying your lab escape is a ridiculous conspiracy theory and we shouldn't hear a word of it. So, as you say, he had the acute conflict of interest, which he not only did he not declare it, the letter concludes by saying, we declare no conflict of interest.
Fantastic. And then there was a second letter. And all of this is, just for our viewers, all of this is happening in February of 2020, when the virus is just coming out in the world, when the world is, and a lot of people think, even us in India, we thought that this will remain in some countries like SARS and MERS, and this will not go to all of the world. And WHO is still figuring out what this is. At that point, these two letters have got published, isn't it?
Yes, that's exactly correct. The Lancet letter was in February of 2020, and the second letter, a group headed by Christian Andersen, a virologist at Scripps, that came out in Nature Medicine in April 2020.
Give me in a line, what was the conclusion in your book that triggered so many scientists and that triggered this entire academia?
Well, it wasn't anything directly in my book. It was simply the book, showed why there is a biological basis to race. it pointed out, if you take any animal population, you spread it across the globe, then you're going to get regional variations in each place because you don't have proper mixing. If you mix up the gene pool thoroughly every generation, everyone's going to be exactly the same. If you let nature take its course, then people will gradually evolve into sort of local variations. It's just a biological process which everyone accepts for every other species. It's just as soon as you start applying Darwinian principles to humans, ever since Darwin first wrote Origin of the Species, his theory has a great capacity to upset people in many different kinds of way.
We gave a bad name to many animals. We said it's pangolin. We said it's snakes. All kinds of animals were given a bad name.
Yes, the pangolins, I think, was a diversion carefully prepared by the Chinese. It was everyone was looking for an intermediate animal, so the Chinese said, "Well, here's some pangolins who've been infected." But there's something wrong with the data in that report. So I think we should forget about pangolins. And once you rule the pangolins out of the picture, there's nothing there. So far, we haven't found any piece of evidence. So this set the stage, I think, for people to be a little more open to alternative hypotheses. It was 15 months since the epidemic arrived, and with no evidence, one just had to sort of be more open-minded to what might happen. That was, I think, the primary event. And then my article came out, which seems to have been quite widely read, and people sort of realized, well, yes, lab escape is certainly a very reasonable possibility. And then we had the letter from the scientists, the May 14 Science, saying, well, we should look into lab leaks seriously. And almost overnight, public opinion seems to have changed.
But how could a virus like this escape from a high security lab like this, that too in China?
Well, there's a simple answer to that, which is that although there is a high security lab in China, it's called BSL Level 4, built for them by the French for some reason, none of Dr. Xi's experiments took place in this lab.
I see.
She's written herself that they took place in the much lower levels of BSL-2, BSL-3. BSL-2 is nothing much, but about the same safety standards as a dentist's office. So it's very easy for a virus to escape from a lab like that.
So just for our viewers, BSL stands for biosafety level. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So the more dangerous things you are dealing with, the higher the biosafety level. So just as an explanation, the Indian company Bharat Biotech, which is making the dead killed coronavirus vaccine, has BSL-3 facility where this is done because they first get live viruses. So just to explain to you.